For months, the pattern went unnoticed. Different locations, different victims, no obvious connection. Yet every scene shared the same disturbing detail. Nothing was taken, and nothing was left behind. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, just silence and questions. Detectives followed every lead, retraced every step, and interviewed everyone nearby. But each time, the trail went cold. It was as if the person responsible understood investigations better than the investigators themselves. And then, one detail, small, almost invisible, changed everything. A clue overlooked at the very beginning, that would finally give this shadow a shape. Northern California in the late 1960s was a place where the sunlight felt soft, the roads wound endlessly through forests, and the nights were alive with the hum of distant engines. But on one particular summer evening in 1968, everything shifted. A scream echoed across a quiet lakeside near Solano County, sharp enough that two fishermen swore the water rippled from the sound alone. When deputies arrived, they found nothing but a blood-soaked picnic blanket, a pair of crushed glasses, and a trail of footprints disappearing into the trees. No body, no witness, no explanation. It was the night residents would later call the first trembling in the earth. At the time, it felt like just another strange case. Only hindsight would reveal that this wasn't random violence. This was an introduction. A signature. The first whisper of the man who would soon be known only as the Ghost Killer. A predator who left behind scenes carved with terror but almost no trace of himself, and who vanished so completely in 1974 that investigators wondered if he was ever real at all. The term Ghost Killer didn't appear in newspapers until much later, when investigators realized every attack carried the same haunting pattern. A message scratched into stone, wood, or even the dirt, always a short phrase, always the same meaning. The first message, found near the lakeside blanket, was etched into a smooth river rock. "Do you see me now?" No one understood it. No one connected it to anything. But over the years, and across more crime scenes, the phrase followed like a chilling echo. Retired Detective Marlon Hayes, interviewed decades later, explained it best. It wasn't that he vanished. It's that he was never fully there. Every detail was crisp, calculated, intentional. But the man behind it, he was smoke. Even today, psychologists debate whether the Ghost Killer sought attention, validation, or something deeply personal. But what made him feared wasn't the brutality of his crimes. It was the subtlety, the patience, and the unnerving calm he demonstrated while Northern California slept, unaware they were living inside a hunter's chosen territory. The second major event took place in early 1969 along a remote stretch of Napa County Vineyard Road. A young couple, Daniel Reyes and Lila Hart, were driving home after a winter festival when their headlights illuminated a figure standing perfectly still in the center of the road. At first, Daniel thought it was a hitchhiker. But as the car slowed, the figure stepped back into the darkness, swallowed instantly by the surrounding vines. When Daniel and Lila later recalled the moment to deputies, they said the man's face was obscured, like it wasn't just shadow but something deeper, a deliberate concealment. Moments later, Lila screamed. A message was carved into the hood of their still-running car, though neither had seen anyone approach. 3 words, "Not for you." Nothing happened to the couple physically, and they drove off terrified. Investigators at the time dismissed the incident as a prank. But 9 months later, miles away, the Ghost Killer would strike again, and the message on the next scene would match perfectly. By the time newspapers began reporting a pattern, it was already too late. The third incident, known internally among investigators as the Orchard Case, unfolded on a fog-strangled evening in Sonoma County. A farmhand discovered a woman lying in an apple grove, uninjured but unconscious, her arms arranged neatly at her sides. Beside her was a scrap of paper pinned to the soil with a wooden skewer, bearing the message, "I let her live because she listened." The phrase raised more questions than answers. Who was she? What had she listened to? Why spare her when the earlier victim had vanished completely? When she finally awoke in the hospital, she had no memory of the hours before her discovery, except one vivid detail. She remembered hearing rhythmic tapping, like someone gently knocking on a hollow door from far away. Doctors chalked it up to trauma, But the pattern of messages, precision, and psychological manipulation was unmistakable. The ghost killer wasn't just attacking. He was constructing something, a story only he understood. The ghost killer's identity became a puzzle investigators obsessed over. They compiled profiles, charts, timelines, filling entire walls with theories, string, and annotated maps. At first, they believed he targeted randomly. But by the fourth incident, detectives realized he wasn't choosing victims. He was choosing locations, places with meaning, symbols that repeated, forming a geometric shape across the region. The points on the map looked almost like a constellation, earning him yet another unofficial name, the cartographer. But as detectives studied the pattern, they were met with a startling realization. Every crime site was accessible through paths not found on tourist maps or county records, old logger trails, abandoned maintenance roads, forgotten driveways. Whoever the ghost killer was, he knew Northern California's hidden arteries better than anyone. Not as a drifter, not as an outsider, as someone who had walked these lands for years. His crimes were not random explosions of violence. They were deliberate intersections of geography, message, and timing, as if he were reenacting something only he remembered. In late 1970, the ghost killer escalated. A college student named Peter Lang vanished after leaving a cafe in Sacramento. His car was found neatly parked, doors locked, keys missing. The only clue was a note taped to the windshield reading, "You see me now." The same message from the lake, now returned like a haunting refrain. But the most chilling detail came later. Peter's roommate received a letter postmarked 3 days after the disappearance. Inside was a sketch, a crude drawing of a tall man standing in a forest clearing, arms extended, with Peter drawn in the background on his knees. Peter's face bore no expression. Beneath the image were 5 words, "He knows why he's here." Authorities traced the postage to a nearby town, but no fingerprints, fibers, or handwriting matches emerged. The ghost killer was evolving, becoming bolder, more theatrical, communicating directly with investigators as if inviting them deeper into a labyrinth he controlled entirely. Reporters soon descended on Northern California, fueling public hysteria. Headlines like "Invisible Predator Stalking Our Communities" and "Ghost Killer Plays Deadly Game" filled front pages. Interviews with frightened residents dominated nightly broadcasts. But amid the chaos, one journalist stood out, Helen Rourke, an investigative reporter with an unshakable intuition. She believed the ghost killer was not simply committing crimes, he was telling a story through them. A narrative broken into cryptic pieces. Rourke published articles proposing that each message represented a psychological chapter, revealing fragments of the man's inner world. Her writing gained national attention, and many believed she provoked the killer. Whether intentionally or not, she became woven into the story. It wasn't long before she received her own letter. No threats, no drawings, just a single sentence typed in perfect alignment. "Stop looking at the map, look at the mirror." The message unsettled investigators, suggesting the ghost killer was watching them more closely than they imagined. In early 1971, a breakthrough came unexpectedly. Deputies investigating an abandoned ranger station deep in Mendocino County discovered a hidden bunker beneath the building, accessible only through a narrow trapdoor concealed under a warped floorboard. Inside, they found a small metal desk, a stack of old county maps, and dozens of Polaroids pinned to the walls. None showed violence or victims. Instead, they captured forests, riverbeds, and isolated paths, photos taken from eerie angles, as though documenting places important only to him. At the center of the bunker was an unfinished mural painted directly onto the concrete wall, a faceless man standing between 2 towering trees. Beneath it appeared yet another message: "Find the one who walks alone." Investigators were baffled. Was this a clue to his identity? A taunt? A warning? The bunker suggested planning, patience, and isolation. But just as excitement surged, reality delivered its cruel twist. The station records showed the building had been abandoned since 1952, meaning the ghost killer had been using it undetected for years. The discovery of the bunker shifted the investigation dramatically. Detectives now believed the ghost killer might be a woodsman, a ranger, or someone raised near national forests, someone who could navigate the wilderness with surgical precision. They began interviewing former forestry employees, retired rangers, and isolated homesteaders. But these efforts yielded nothing. Then a chilling realization struck. Every location captured in the Polaroids was part of a declining region where logging families had been displaced throughout the 1940s and 50s. Entire communities had vanished from the records as industries collapsed. Many families moved away. Some stayed behind. But some simply disappeared from documentation altogether. Sheriff Hayes later said, "We were chasing a ghost because he came from a ghost town." The ghost killer wasn't hiding in modern society. He was a relic of the forgotten corners of Northern California, shaped by isolation, abandonment, and decades of wandering paths no one else remembered existed. In the summer of 1971, the ghost killer left his boldest message yet. A campsite near Shasta Lake was discovered abandoned, the fire still smoldering. 3 hikers were missing, and their gear remained untouched. On a nearby boulder, written in charcoal, were the words, "3 walked in. 1 walks alone." Search teams combed the forests for weeks. Finally, they found only one of the hikers, unharmed but in a delirious state, wandering barefoot along a logging road. He claimed he heard whispering in the dark, felt someone tug at his pack, but never saw a face. The other 2 hikers were never found. What unsettled investigators most was that the rescued hiker repeated one phrase over and over. "He didn't want me. He said I wasn't the one." This implied selection. Criteria. A disturbing hint that the ghost killer chose victims based on something more than opportunity. Something personal. Something rooted in the identity he pursued or the past he could not escape. As public fear escalated, community meetings became battlegrounds of panic and suspicion. Residents demanded curfews, volunteer patrols, even armed checkpoints on forest roads. Yet the ghost killer seemed unaffected, almost amused by the frenzy. In October 1971, a hunter discovered another message carved into the bark of a massive redwood deep in Humboldt County. "You're searching the wrong way." Authorities interpreted it as mockery, but reporter Helen Rourke viewed it differently. She believed the killer was signaling that investigators were misinterpreting his motives and patterns. She wrote in one article, "We are looking outward, but he communicates inward. His crimes are reflections, not signatures." Though controversial, her analysis ignited a shift among some detectives. They began re-evaluating his actions not as random killings, but as symbolic expressions tied to a fractured identity. Meanwhile, sightings emerged. People swore they'd glimpsed a tall, solitary man walking remote ridgelines at dusk. These sightings were never confirmed, but they strengthened the legend that the ghost killer moved with near-supernatural stealth, always ahead of those trying to corner him. In early 1972, a chilling event shook the investigation. A small-town librarian in Reading reported a strange man who spent hours studying genealogy archives, town records, and decades-old forestry documents. The man never spoke, wore a weathered coat, and left behind no fingerprints on any materials. When she approached him to ask if he needed help, he simply raised a finger to his lips and whispered, "Do you see me now?" Those familiar words triggered alarm across multiple jurisdictions. But by the time deputies arrived, the man had vanished completely, leaving only a faint scent of pine and old paper in the quiet room. The librarian's description, tall, gaunt, with a slow, deliberate gait, fit several earlier witness accounts. This confirmed investigators' fears. The ghost killer was not confined to wilderness areas. He could blend into public spaces when he chose, appearing almost ordinary until he disappeared again. His boldness suggested he felt untouchable. Or perhaps he wanted to be recognized, but only according to rules he controlled entirely. The ghost killer's next message was found not at a crime scene, but mailed directly to the office of Sheriff Hayes. Inside a plain envelope lay a postcard showing an old logging bridge, half-rotted and overtaken by moss. On the back was a single sentence, "Meet me where the lost paths cross." Investigators scrambled to decipher the clue. Hayes, who had grown up in the region, recognized the bridge immediately. It was part of a now-defunct cattle trail near Trinity County, rarely visited. A tactical team was dispatched within hours. They found the bridge intact, silent, eerily undisturbed, except for a small wooden figurine placed in the center. It depicted a man with no face. Beneath it was a strip of cloth believed to belong to one of the missing hikers. But there was no sign of the ghost killer. Some detectives theorized he had been watching from the trees, slipping away as soon as they arrived. Others believed he wanted to demonstrate power, proof he could summon law enforcement to any location he wished, like actors on a stage he designed. By mid-1972, the case had grown beyond local authorities. Federal investigators joined, bringing profilers, forensic experts, and new technology. But the ghost killer adapted. His messages became shorter, sharper, like a voice losing patience. His locations grew closer to populated areas yet remained meticulously chosen to avoid detection. That September, a woman named Ellen Carter was found sitting unharmed on the steps of a rural church, clutching a note. She told officers she'd been walking home when a man approached her silently from behind, gently placed the note in her hand, and vanished into darkness before she could turn. The note read, "Do not fear the one who walks alone." When asked why he spared her, Ellen tearfully said, "He told me I reminded him of someone." This cryptic detail deepened speculation that the ghost killer's crimes were connected to his personal history, perhaps loss, abandonment, or childhood trauma. Yet every time investigators believed they were closing in, he drifted away again like smoke through the fingers. Despite the killer's elusiveness, one accidental clue emerged. A ranger surveying a burned patch of forest near Lassen National Park stumbled upon a buried box. Inside were several water-damaged journals filled with sketches, detailed drawings of trees, streams, faces without eyes, and complex map-like patterns. One sketch in particular caught investigators' attention. It showed a young boy standing alone beside a collapsed cabin, with the caption, "The last one who stayed." Although the journals lacked dates or names, the drawings suggested a deeply isolated childhood, possibly tied to remote logging communities that dissolved decades earlier. Investigators theorized the ghost killer might have been a child left behind during those relocations, forced to survive in near-total isolation. The idea seemed far-fetched until land records confirmed several families had indeed vanished from census rolls during the 1950s. If the killer was a survivor of one of those lost homesteads, it would explain his uncanny knowledge of the terrain, and his obsession with the phrase "walks alone." Tension peaked in 1973 when a deputy spotted a figure matching the ghost killer's description crossing an abandoned fire road near Mount Shasta. The deputy pursued him on foot, radioing for backup. According to his report, the man moved with alarming speed, not running, but gliding through dense underbrush that slowed everyone else. At one point, the deputy caught a clear glimpse, tall, thin, angular, with shoulders slightly hunched as if accustomed to carrying heavy weight. The man paused atop a ridge, turned his head, and seemed almost amused before disappearing over the crest. When officers reached the spot moments later, they found only a message written in ash at their feet. Too many footsteps. This was the closest any officer ever came to catching him. The incident shook the department. If the man could traverse such rugged terrain so effortlessly, they were dealing with someone forged by the wilderness itself, someone who did not fear the land but belonged to it. Around this time, reporter Helen Rourke made a discovery that would alter the investigation's course. She uncovered archived reports about a remote settlement called Briar Ridge, once home to a tight-knit community of loggers. The town had collapsed in the late 1940s due to economic downturn and a devastating wildfire. Many families relocated. But according to Rourke's findings, one family, the Durrants, never properly recorded their departure. Neighbors recalled whispers of a troubled father, an anxious mother, and a solitary child who roamed the woods for hours. The child was described as unnervingly quiet, with a habit of carving shapes into trees. While there was no direct evidence linking this child to the ghost killer, the resemblance was too striking to ignore. Rourke believed the killer might be the surviving son of Briar Ridge, a man shaped by abandonment, fire, and wilderness. Her article caused an uproar. Authorities publicly dismissed her claims, But privately, investigators began revisiting abandoned settlements and forgotten property records, compelled by the possibility she was right. But the ghost killer did not stay silent about Rourke's investigation. She received another letter, this one handwritten, the pen strokes heavy and uneven. It read, "Stories are dangerous when they find their truth." The message sent chills through the newsroom. Unlike earlier correspondences, this letter revealed emotion, threat, fear, or perhaps warning. Rourke's editors urged her to step back, but she refused, convinced she was uncovering the killer's earliest origins. Days later, a package arrived at the sheriff's office containing a small wooden carving. It depicted a cabin identical to one described in Rourke's article. Its roof collapsed, its doorway tilted. Beneath it was a single word burned into the wood: remember. Investigators debated the meaning. Was it confirmation of his connection to Briar Ridge? Or merely manipulation designed to push them further into his psychological maze? To Rourke, it was validation. But she couldn't shake the growing fear that with every step closer to the truth, she was stepping deeper into the killer's personal mythology, a story he might not want rewritten. By late 1973, the ghost killer's activity slowed. Months passed with no disappearances, no messages, no sightings. Authorities hoped he had died, moved away, or simply stopped. But Sheriff Hayes felt uneasy. "Predators don't retire," he said. "They wait." His instincts proved right when, after 7 silent months, a hiker discovered a stone circle in a remote glen near Trinity River. At its center lay a scrap of fabric tied around a wooden stick, fluttering like a flag. Carved into one of the stones were the words, "The story ends where it began." Investigators interpreted this as a clue referencing the first known crime near Solano County. Teams were dispatched to re-examine the 1968 lakeside. What they found was chilling. A new message carved into a tree trunk, fresh, shallow, unmistakably recent. It read, "I walk alone no more." This haunting phrase suggested transformation. Or closure. It was the first time the ghost killer had implied any kind of ending, raising the terrifying question: was he preparing for his final act? As winter 1974 approached, investigators believed the ghost killer was preparing to reveal something, perhaps his identity, or a final message. They increased patrols across forested areas, used helicopters to scan ridge lines, and even deployed heat-tracking equipment. Still, he remained elusive. Then, one January night, a young woman named Susan Holloway was found wandering along a rural highway in Tehama County, barefoot and disoriented. She claimed she'd been taken by a man who walked silently, spoke softly, and released her without explanation. Her last memory was being led through a forest clearing where dozens of stones were arranged in a perfect spiral. At the spiral's center stood the man himself, motionless, as if waiting for something. Susan said he leaned close and whispered, "You are not the ending." When investigators searched the area she described, they found the spiral. But nothing else, not a footprint, not a discarded object, not even a disturbed branch. It was as though the killer had dissolved into the forest just moments before they arrived. This final resurfacing before his disappearance fueled theories that the ghost killer believed his story. The carefully crafted narrative woven through years of cryptic messages needed a conclusion. Some investigators theorized he viewed himself less as a murderer and more as an author writing an epic that only he understood. Others believed he had been preparing for a ritualistic transformation or severing of identity. A federal profiler noted, he may have seen 1968 to 1974 as a closed cycle, a symbolic arc. To him, completion might mean disappearance, literal or psychological. Reporters across the country speculated wildly. Was he terminally ill, planning suicide, leaving the region, or evolving into a new persona entirely? Despite national coverage, no new leads surfaced. It was as if he had stepped behind an invisible curtain and pulled it shut. But authorities refused to accept he was truly gone. They expanded the search radius, re-interviewed witnesses, and even dredged lakes. Each effort returned the same quiet answer: nothing. The ghost killer's final confirmed message appeared unexpectedly in March 1974. A mail carrier delivering letters to a remote cabin in Siskiyou County found an envelope propped against the door frame. It contained a hand-drawn map, crude but recognizable. It showed a winding path leading to a circle labeled with a single word, "Here." Federal agents rushed to the cabin, created a perimeter, and followed the map into the surrounding forest. After several miles, they reached a clearing with a single stone placed upright in the soil. On its surface were the ghost killer's last recorded words, "I leave the walking to you." There was no body, no evidence, no signs of struggle. It was as though he had surrendered the story to investigators, abandoning his presence entirely. The message echoed his earlier phrases, yet reversed their meaning. After years of claiming to walk alone, he now implied that only the searchers remained walking, continuing a story he had chosen to exit. The case officially went cold in late 1974. Law enforcement agencies closed active investigations but maintained open files, hoping some future breakthrough would reveal the truth. Yet whispers persisted. Ranchers reported glimpsing a lone figure on distant ridges. Campers heard soft tapping in the night, like someone knocking on hollow wood. A ranger claimed he found footprints circling his outpost one morning, though no one had approached his cabin. These accounts were inconsistent and unverifiable, but they preserved the ghost killer's legend. Some believed he died in the wilderness, consumed by the land that had shaped him. Others believed he simply resumed the life he once lived, a solitary wanderer slipping between forgotten trails, unseen and unremarked. Still others argued that he had evolved, abandoning his identity entirely and adopting a new one somewhere far away. The truth remained a vacuum, filled only by speculation, folklore, and the unsettling feeling that the story wasn't really finished, only paused. Reporter Helen Rourke never stopped investigating. Even after newspapers moved on and the public's attention faded, she returned repeatedly to Briar Ridge, hiking through charred woods and collapsed homesteads. In 1976, she discovered something that still unsettles researchers today: a series of carved symbols on a fallen timber beam of an old cabin, symbols identical to those found in the ghost killer's journals. Beneath them was a faint engraving, "No more footsteps." Rourke documented everything, but the discovery only deepened the mystery rather than clarifying it. Was it a confession? A farewell? Or had the symbols been carved decades earlier by the boy she suspected? If so, it would mean the ghost killer had been shaping his identity long before his crimes began. Rourke believed the truth lay somewhere in the ashes of Briar Ridge, but she admitted that each revelation felt like a riddle designed to mislead rather than illuminate. Still, she refused to abandon the pursuit, calling it a story that refuses to end. Theories about the ghost killer's disappearance multiplied over the years. Some investigators believed he succumbed to injury or exposure, wandering too deep into the wilderness. Others argued he staged his own death, leaving false clues to create the illusion of vanishing. A few believed he intentionally walked into the heart of the forest to erase himself, a symbolic death chosen by a man obsessed with stories and endings. Criminal psychologists studied his behavior for decades, using his case to explore themes of isolation, trauma, and identity fragmentation. They concluded that he viewed his crimes not as acts of violence, but as a narrative he authored to control a world that had once abandoned him. When the narrative reached what he considered its natural conclusion, he simply exited the stage. Yet none of these theories answer the most haunting question. If he needed the story to end, why leave so many loose threads behind? Unless the loose threads were intentional, designed to ensure that someone, in the decades that followed, hikers occasionally reported stumbling upon unsettling objects deep in Northern California's forests, arrangements of stones, carved tree trunks, or abandoned campsites with symbols etched into the dirt. Most were dismissed as unrelated or as imitations by people fascinated with the legend. But a few sites bore uncanny resemblance to earlier crime scenes, raising the possibility that the ghost killer had left behind a trail that extended far beyond his known timeline. One discovery in 1989 particularly troubled investigators: a wooden figurine found near a forgotten trailhead, carved with the same faceless design seen in the bunker years earlier. Its wood was weathered, but experts believed it had not been exposed to the elements for more than a decade. How had it appeared so close to a public trail without being noticed before? Had someone moved it? Or was it left by someone who knew exactly where to place it so it would eventually be found? The questions piled higher than the A. Meanwhile, a handful of retired detectives maintained personal files on the case, convinced the ghost killer's story wasn't over. One detective, Gerald Simmons, believed the key lay in a concept he called echo behavior. He theorized the killer might have continued creating symbolic markers long after his crimes ended, not as part of a new killing spree but as a method of preserving his identity in fragments scattered across the wilderness. Simmons spent years hiking remote regions, documenting unusual carvings, stacked stones, and abandoned campsites. His final report claimed the markings formed a pattern, a massive geometric shape stretching across multiple counties, echoing the constellation-like mapping first identified in the early years of the investigation. If true, this suggested the ghost killer's final act might still be in progress long after he vanished. Simmons died before he could publish his findings, leaving behind notebooks filled with sketches, coordinates, and cryptic annotations no 1H. To this day, the ghost killer remains a specter over Northern California's history, a reminder of how someone can move among society unseen, leaving behind only fragments of intention. Modern investigators occasionally revisit the case with updated technology, DNA analysis, digital mapping, geological forensics. Yet each new attempt reinforces the same conclusion. The ghost killer was not only skilled, he was profoundly intentional. His ability to navigate wilderness, manipulate fear, and control narrative suggests a mind shaped by isolation and sharpened by survival. And while his crimes ceased in 1974, the psychological imprint of his legend persists. Campfire storytellers still whisper about the man who walked alone. Hikers claim to feel watched on forgotten trails. Some say that if you stand in the right clearing at dusk, you can hear faint tapping, like someone knocking on hollow wood in the distance. What makes the ghost killer's story endure is not the brutality of his crimes, nor the mystery of his identity, but the uncanny sense of authorship behind everything he did. His messages, his symbols, even his silence felt crafted, not impulsive, but poetic in a haunting, fractured way. It is rare for a criminal to vanish so completely that even their origin becomes speculation. For many, he represents a contradiction, a man who wanted to be seen but never known, who walked alone yet demanded pursuit. The paradox is what keeps investigators and storytellers returning, searching for meaning in the spaces he left empty. In every theory, every sighting, every clue, there is a lingering sense that the story is still breathing, that somewhere in the vast, tangled forests of Northern California, the ghost killer's legacy continues to echo, waiting for someone to step into the next chapter. And so the story ends as it began, with a question, not an answer. Northern California's ghost killer, active from 1968 to 1974, left behind more than fear or tragedy. He left behind a narrative constructed from shadows, symbols, and silence. His disappearance remains one of the most confounding vanishing acts in criminal history, real or imagined. The forests that shaped him still stand, dense and quiet, their trails winding deeper than maps can show. Some believe he died long ago. Others insist he lived on, shedding identities like old coats. But those who studied him most closely carry a different belief, that for the ghost killer, vanishing was not an escape but a conclusion, a final stroke of authorship, a way of saying the story was never about the man, but the emptiness he stepped into. Whether he walks alone still, or whether he stopped walking altogether, remains a mystery. And perhaps that is exactly how he intended it to be.